This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, we're actually rolling this time. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. We are doing this one live and in person in my basement today. I got two of my friends, Matt Barber and Josh Williams, with me. They've both been on the show before. We tried to record the intro just a minute ago, and I completely forgot to hit the settings on GarageBand because I'm not doing an internet interview. So that was a lot of fun. But we all grew up. We all grew up in the late '90s, early 2000s church culture, and there were a lot of elements of that kind of evangelical Christian culture that were very, very strange and I think did some more harm than good. And I've talked to a lot of people about that on the show before, but I've been to church with both of these guys. We've been friends for a long time, so we've talked about our experiences, and I know that they feel the same way about this that I do and that a lot of you guys probably do as well. So I just wanted to have them on the show to talk about some of their experiences today and the direction that they think the American church is headed right now. As I said, both of them have been on my show. Matt, as we were saying before, you were my very first guest ever on the Protestant Libertarian.
Which is exciting.
Yeah.
I'll take great pride in that.
Yeah, episode 13, you're number one. You made me, so I really appreciate that.
Okay, yeah.
We were talking about Christian higher ed back then, but for my audience members who are new, who don't remember every episode or every word of episode 13, just introduce us or introduce yourself to our audience here, Matt.
So Matt Barber. I live in Independence, Kentucky with my wife Chastity, two sons, Titus and Tatum. So I had a long stint in Christian higher ed, both as a professor and then in some administrative roles. Now I do learning and development for a large healthcare manufacturing organization. And, I just love hanging out with my friends, obviously known Alex and Josh for a long time. And I've grown up lifelong churchgoer, Christian, all that stuff. So, yeah, I guess that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. All right. Well, Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Josh Williams. I live in northern Kentucky, I guess Crescent Springs, Kentucky. I am a stay-at-home dad, and I am married to a physician who takes care of me very well. We have three children, Ben, Cece, and Edie, all 8 years old and under, and so my plate is really full all the time with that. But yeah, I grew up in church all my life. Went to a small Bible college for a time. Was involved in youth work, involved in singing, different things of this nature. And so just an all around, jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to the church scene. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
You're also a podcaster too. I'm going to give you a chance to plug everything at the end, but just tell people a little about your podcast.
Yeah. I've been doing podcasting for probably about 7 to 8 years, on and off with different shows. I had a Well Dadgum podcast that I've done in a long time. Fun interviewing process. A lot what Alex did, except for just average everyday people with no particular thing except for telling a poop story or something like that, telling something close to that. But now we do Pod Bless, which is a really fun time, Christian show where a pastor and a few of us that are in church just get together and try to have a fun time and do a bunch of jokes and segments. So yeah, it's good stuff.
And I'll put all links to that in the show notes and everything at the end here. But this is going to be more of an open-ended conversation today. Again, just three guys hanging out in the basement around microphones at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And again, Matt and Josh apparently were up late last night shooting each other on video games. So I appreciate them having the fortitude to come in here and talk this morning. But again, like I was saying, I just want to talk about some of the experiences that we had growing up in church because it was, and I think that we all kind of had, at least I know that I did when I was in high school. I kind of knew that some of the experiences that I was having in church were like weird and didn't necessarily correspond to what I was reading in the Bible. And I've noticed that over the last 7 or 8 years, there were a lot of people that were very serious about their faith 20 years ago that have kind of moved away. And I definitely think that the kind of bizarre nature of church culture in the late 90s and early 2000s contributed a lot to that. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get to the bottom of it today, but both of you guys had very similar experiences to me, and both of you guys grew up in churches. So I just want to open this up to you. Like, what were some of your talk to me about growing up in church? What's your background there? What were some of your early formative experiences like?
Yeah. I grew up in East Kentucky, so it was real backwoods, holler kind of stuff. Grew up with a lot of Bible thumping. People can register with that concept of turn or burn, hey, really hardcore about things. There was no mixed swimming. There was no, boys and girls holding hands places and thus a lot of rules. I know when my mom and dad grew up, they talk about how if you were at church, you had to have like long sleeves. That was even to the point of like you couldn't wear short sleeves in church. It was a disrespect to God. Just a lot of different rules that way that, of course, we've totally flip-flopped on over the years. There was no mixed swimming. There was none of this other stuff. And so I kind of grew up in that concept. Now, you say early or late 90s, early 2000s. I was born in 83. And so a lot of the 80s, I was even getting a lot of information in, and the bigger chunk of the 90s was a part of my childhood. But like, it was just, I don't know, as the older I got, is the more where I found information about what was so messed up. I just took things for granted as a kid, was really naive, and was like, yep, okay, this is how things roll. This is what we're going to do. Saved, sanctified, baptized. Let's get this rolling. But yeah, like you said, as we grow older, we start figuring out so many of the things, the loopholes and the, I don't even know what to say there, but like
loopholes. That's an interesting.
Yeah, like that happened through the church in ministry and in just being a lay person of the church. So,
yeah. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I grew up as a pastor's kid, preacher's kid. So what that means is that I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday evening. If there's a special event, like I'm at church. Kind of just like what Josh was saying. I think that the way I've kind of framed this in my head is that back in the 90s or 80s, 90s, 2000s, I think you really kind of, the way that you identified as a Christian was by what you didn't do. So, they had like sayings about like, we don't, what is it, like smoke? Or
I don't smoke, chew, or go with her girls who do.
Yeah, something like that. Like, so really, it's like you really like the thing that like the way that you kind of showed people that you were a Christian was that basically like by the things that you abstained from. So like you didn't drink, you didn't smoke tobacco, and like drugs were like the devil.
Yeah.
And so so like so I mean I think that was kind of my upbringing. So we moved being a pastor's kid. We went to a bunch of different churches. So for like every 5 years or so, we would move to a different church in a different state. Mostly they were smaller, conservative churches. It wasn't a bad experience. I don't really have a lot of, too many negative, memories, I guess, of kind of grow up in that atmosphere. But it wasn't really until I got older that I kind of saw some of the stuff that was, like you were saying, a little weird. Like, maybe missing the point just a touch,
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that was probably my upbringing.
Yeah, well, I want to ask, because both you guys were raised in the Nazarene church, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, my wife and I are new to the Nazarene church. Like, when I was born and baptized Catholic, and I know I've talked about that before. And then my family went to a Methodist church for a very brief period of time. And then, like, the formative years of my life, I spent in the Lutheran church, which is more of like a mainline church. But even in like the early 2000s, that was still very much influenced by like American evangelical culture. So even though like theologically, it had more in common with the traditional kind of Protestant churches, it was definitely heavily influenced by the kind of weird evangelical culture. And so I was exposed to that. But it wasn't really until I went to college and went to a Restoration Movement church where they're like, the Church of Christ, like firmly within that kind of fundamentalist evangelical tradition, that I was really exposed to those kinds of ideas for the first time. Like there was always a little bit of leniency within Lutheranism. Like, people drank beer and that wasn't a big deal. And, and it was like people cussed and you could wear pretty much whatever you wanted to church. Like our services were very formal, but it was not like what I experienced building friendships and relationships with people that came from very traditional churches. And it really, like the Nazarene church that I go to now, seems pretty moderate to me, like pretty consistent. But I learned not long after we started attending there that the Nazarene church has not always been like that. And there have been some changes. So maybe if you guys could explain to my audience and then also to me too, just like the trajectory of the Nazarene church, like how does that fit within kind of this, like this Protestant landscape in the United States?
Well, so, I mean, I'm not, I think I mentioned the last time I was on the show too. It's like, so I don't have any degrees in like theology or, never been a pastor, but, I was born and raised in the Nazarene church. And so like, if you go by like the manual, the manual has very clear language on things like, abstaining from alcohol is one. I think that, I don't know if it's still in there because it's been a number of years since I've actually read the manual, but I know that when I was growing up, it specifically said that you shouldn't be going to like movies. So you weren't allowed to go like to the movie theaters.
And that's all of them, not just the ones that are rated R,
Correct.
but like,
like,
you can't
don't go to the movies.
Yeah.
Like period. I think there was something in there about dancing. So I don't think that you're supposed to dance. I think they may have had like an exception maybe for weddings.
Yeah, there was different rules of like, as long as you keep 1 foot on the ground, it's not considered.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I mean,
loopholes.
Essentially, I mean, essentially what they did is like they really did the Nazarene Church. They had very specific regulations for things. Like, I mean, obviously they had like the normal things, like no premarital sex,
right?
And then like I'm trying to think of some of the other things that were pretty staple. I know at one point in my childhood, the Church of the Nazarene. They made a statement that they were not banning but boycotting Disney.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember now for what reason, but like I know that in the 90s at one point the Nazarene Church boycotted Disney.
like as an official position of the
like they
denomination.
made a statement like we are boycotting Disney because, and I can't remember the reason.
There was, I don't know, his head was frozen and stuff in cryogenic stuff. I don't know. There was
well, and it's like that's before Disney went woke. Like Disney was still,
it was
right,
pre woke Disney.
Yeah.
So I can't, and it was I can't remember. I wish I could remember the reason, but it was like at the time I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
As a kid I was like, yeah, we should boycott Disney. So I would just say that as far as strictness goes, I mean, I guess growing up, I saw churches or denominations that were more strict than us, so it didn't seem too weird what we were doing, because you would see the people who were like, to the further extreme. Yeah. And then as far as like the churches who were a little bit looser, kind of like the Catholics or the Lutherans, we just thought those guys were crazy. Right. Like those guys are wild. So yeah, I mean, I would say. Pretty strict, like kind of like what Josh mentioned earlier. Yeah. No shorts in church ever.
Yeah.
In fact, like I mentioned my dad was a pastor. I think that that one of the first signals to me that something was a little weird was that he was pastoring a church, and we found out like so a woman left the church, and I was like, why'd so and so leave the church? And it was because like she had driven past the parsonage. Back in they still have parsonages, but they had driven past the parsonage and they saw my dad. I think he might have been like mowing grass in shorts. And so because she saw the pastor in shorts, she was like, no, like this will not stand. And like, I never saw that lady again. So anyway, stuff like that. I mean, I guess, I can't, to be honest with you, I can't remember what the question was.
Oh no, just giving some perspective on the Nazarene Church, which again, like a lot of my listeners, just based on the feedback that I've gotten, a lot of my listeners came from churches that were kind of like that. I mean, I know you talked about it a little bit earlier too, Josh. Was that kind of your experience growing up in the Nazarene? Like very, very by the books, very traditional.
Yeah. Tradition was key for sure. And like I said, I didn't notice it until I got older because I was just naive, happy-go-lucky, like whatever you say, and that was the Bible college I went to as well. Very, very conservative. Yeah. If you got on stage to do something, you had to have a suit, tie, coat. Wow. Going to class, you had to wear slacks and a button-up shirt and just all this different stuff. But yeah, it was very much that growing up as a kid. There was a lot of evangelists that would travel through, circuit preachers, if you will, I guess, that would come through the hills and preach a sermon, and it would change everything about our area. I know growing up, I couldn't watch He-Man. I couldn't watch Smurfs. Yeah. I couldn't watch anything that had to do, because Smurfs had Gargamel, who was a sorcerer. So that was the reason it had sorcery. And that was a lot about Disney, I think, as well, because they would have fairies and they would have people doing magic, and magic was evil. And so, despite miracles from the Bible or magic, it was two different things, and I don't know. But so, yeah, I wasn't allowed to watch the normal cartoons. I would still try to find a way to do so. But it seemed like they would always try to be grabbing onto things that were kind of made up for them, as opposed to taking on the serious things such as sexual immorality, addiction, things that were secret. So if it was a secret, we didn't deal with it. But if it was like on television, which is the demon box, it was easier to make a rule about that or to make it. But yeah, very strict stuff growing up as a kid. And like I said, didn't realize it at the time until I got older and was like, wow, this was weird. Why did we do this?
So do you guys know what changed in the Nazarene Church that moderated it a little bit? Because that's not been, again, my experience in the Nazarene Church goes back to 2017. So, I've not been involved for very long. Do you guys have any idea like what moderated that within the church?
My answer is attendance, but that's
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, that's one of the things I wasn't going to do is, I don't want to like speak on behalf of the Nazarene Church.
Right? No, this is just our best guess.
Yeah. But my best guess
they don't
is,
want us talking for them.
yeah. But like I would say that probably with attendance, and then also, I mean, I don't really, I guess I don't really know from the government standpoint, other than like I think that we kind of talked about like off the podcast about the difference between being like a seeker sensitive, is that the word?
Yeah.
So there's kind of like a different approach to churches, to where like some churches are like we're going to hold the line, and if you want to be a part of us, that's fine, but you're going to adhere to these rules that we go by. And then there's kind of the other extreme, which is that we're a church and we believe in these things, but like, if you want to come in and, kind of do all these freaky things or whatever. And like, that's, we're happy to have you. Like, and we're like, some churches, I know that they're criticized, like they'll like hide the cross, I'm saying, because the cross might be offensive. So like, I think that it's not so much that, I don't know that it necessarily was intentional. I think that there's probably this spectrum of like, how much are you willing to kind of accept the people who are coming through your doors? And then, how much are you willing to kind of like bend? I know that we had a pastor that was really, like, he always used to preach on like the upholding of truth and grace. And so I think that there's a balance. And like, I think just that what has changed over the years is kind of where you're at on that spectrum, as far as like, okay, we're going to hold this line, or, we're going to try to apply grace in this situation. So that would be my best guess answer to that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to talk about something, and I gave you guys these questions beforehand, so you had some time to think about them. And I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to share some of the strangest stories that you had, like personally growing up. So we have this as a backdrop. And again, being raised in the Lutheran church, I was insulated from quite a bit of this because people just didn't like. Again, everyone drank. If you wanted to wear jeans and a polo to church on Sunday, no one really cared about that much. Like you listen to rock and roll, and that like no one cared about Harry Potter. Like it was just like not something that they did in that church. But I do remember, like, for me, one of the first times that I came in contact with somebody that had come from a very, very traditional background was on a mission trip. And like, I guess for me too. So when I became a Christian when I was 15, and I immediately started reading the Bible. And so like my problem with the Lutheran church was not that it was too restrictive. I thought that it like wasn't restrictive enough. And again, some of that was just like me reading the Bible within the framework of evangelical culture and being like, well, we should take this stuff really, really seriously. And I did a lot of misreading of that, but I was always very serious about, okay, like, well, there are ethical ramifications if we're Christians, and why is it that my church doesn't seem to like care about a lot of those ethical ramifications? So that was kind of interesting. But I was on a mission trip one time, and it was like it was an ecumenical missions organization. So we were like there, I guess, as a Lutheran church, and there were a couple of other churches that were from different backgrounds that were on this trip. And I remember we're doing this in like North Carolina in the middle of the summer, and we were going to be doing a work camp during the middle of the day. And me and my friends had packed nothing but cut off t-shirts to work in because we were going to be sweating. So like the first morning we get up, we get our showers, ready to go, put our cut off t-shirts on, like we're ready to go out there and shovel or do whatever they wanted us to do. And the director came up and she's like, yeah, you guys can't wear that here. And we're like, well, these are our work shirts. Like, she's like, well, yeah, there's a lot of people just say we don't do cut off shirts. Like that's too revealing. And we're like, well, we're just like guys that are trying to go work. She's like, you can't do it. So I wound up having to borrow a sleep shirt from a girl that came on the mission. She had like an oversized t-shirt, and my buddy did too. And my buddy's a little bit bigger than me, so he was like, kind of squeezing in that shirt. But we had to wear that all week long, and that whole time I was like, what is wrong with this?
Right.
But I realized, I guess, that they were, I think these were like Southern Baptists that like kind of, so we couldn't do it. So that was like one of the first experiences that I had where I was like, wow, like there are people out there that are way more serious about some of this stuff than I am. So like, I guess with that, is my offering. What are some of your stories? Like, what's some of the weirdest stuff that happened to you guys when you were growing up in church?
Well, like I said, the whole not being able to watch cartoons, that was the rough one as a kid, because that was all I cared about at the time.
Talk about your Bible college.
Yeah,
dude. Yeah, you had I thought my Bible college was strict, and then I talked to you, and I realized it's nothing compared to what you experienced.
Yeah. Now, be in mind, I did feel called to go there. It was one of those things I did feel God say, you need to go here. And maybe it was something to like get me a little reined in from where I was heading. But yeah, I went to a small Bible college in Kentucky, and their rules were very strict, where no shorts, even in your spare time. Like what you were saying, going to dig holes and stuff like that. Like even then, like you had to wear at least short sleeve, and you had to wear long pants.
Were you allowed to wear denim? Like, could you wear jeans?
Oh yeah, you could wear jeans.
That's good, but
no sweatpants.
No jorts.
Sweatpants were
no jorts, no sweatpants.
Yeah, ever since the '80s, they were like, no more sweatpants. We can't have these guys running around.
So what did they do? Just real quick, is like when you went to work out, like if you went for a run.
Yep, athletic pants.
All right, okay,
Adidas.
So not sweatpants. But
You had to have something a little bagginess to it. But yeah, there were so many different rules like that, and even dating, you had to set up a whole guideline situation where you met with a supervisor. It wasn't just like, hey, you want to go out? It was, okay, we got to talk to an official. We got to write a whole paper out and saying what our goals are, what our restrictions are going to be for ourselves. Very, very, and that's how I got kicked out, of course, because I didn't follow those rules to the T, all because of passion,
Just a lover.
Yeah. I did learn a lot of things there. I was always trying to push the limits of stuff. You couldn't have a radical haircut. You couldn't have a bowl cut. You couldn't have spiked hair. You couldn't, like all the things that are a big deal to kids nowadays, I guess. And so I would grow my sideburns out all the way to my earlobe and then try to connect it in with my mustache, because you could have a mustache and you could have sideburns, but they couldn't go past your earlobe. So I would like push the limits of rules to see if they would just get mad at me, and they would just let me do it. I was like, guys, went to a supervisor. I was like, I look like an idiot. Why are you letting me do this? They're like, we were just waiting for you to fix it. Like we're not wanting to like come down on you hard. But and that kind of brings me into some of the questions you have for later, but yeah, there was just so much guidelines. There's so much restriction that I don't know. I did meet a lot of interesting people that didn't come from my background while I was there that pushed the limits as well, but they pushed it spiritually. And so I met some Pentecostal people that were like, oh yeah, I want to come to this college. It's really, it's a really good place to learn. But they would also end up, when we would go into worship and stuff, show me a lot of different things of, when they would worship, they would sometimes get down and lay flat on the floor to be before God, as though they were bowing down before His feet. And I was like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" This. And then I ended up kind of bringing that into my life for a little while, to where just that symbolization, or if that's even the right term, that being that symbol of laying before the feet of God, and so there was neat things that I learned from people outside of that realm. But the rules and stuff like that, I really have grown away from so much of it. There is a part of it that hangs on to me now, that when, like you said, at our church, we're a little more lax. You can wear jeans, you can wear shorts, whatever, it doesn't matter. And there is a part of me that kind of goes back to that old roots way of things, of like, I don't know, guys. Thought about how you dress, but like just how you handle yourself in situations, allowing certain things in life. And I guess those things don't convict me enough to change my life, but in my brain, it starts clicking of like, oh,
yeah,
no, don't jump into that.
It's like an automatic response,
Yeah. So yeah, it was a lot of fun going to Bible college, and learning, and I don't know, I talk about it all the time, so I don't know if it's something that's eating at me that I got kicked out and things, but I got kicked out like 3 separate times. Like two of the times were like unofficial, of like students were coming together and like, hey, can you not come up here anymore? And I'm like, okay, sorry. I was just wanting to hang out and have a good time. Because they felt that I stopped praying at Bible college and preying on the new students coming in.
Praying with an E.
Yeah, praying with an E. Yeah, they felt it.
Prayer to pray.
So yeah, it was, the rules were always a big deal to me in my life. But more so, like I was saying before too, about the circuit preachers coming through and stuff like that. I think those had the bigger pull on my life, because my mom was the spiritual leader. Dad went to church, but she was the one that was like, okay, this is what we're doing now. And I'm like, wait, why are we doing this? And what was it? Terror in the toy chest, I think, was what one pastor come through preaching. And so, yeah, there was just a ton of things that we, like Matt was bringing up before, not allowed to have. That's how you showed your difference as a Christian, is by not doing things or by cutting things out of your life. But
yeah. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, so the question is like weird things from the childhood growing up. Yeah, so I think that the things that came to mind for me were that so one, the music. I felt like the music was pretty odd. So I think that I don't know if you guys have heard the term like the Jesus juke. But like where you kind of take something that's secular and then you just put the Jesus juke on it, which is like, you just kind of make it like, so I felt like there was a lot of that, especially in like the late 90s. I don't know if you guys remember that artist, Carmen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've done full segments about him.
Yeah, but like, the music I felt was pretty bad. And then like I remember, especially when I was so I went to a Christian middle school. And one of the things that they were really trying to push at the middle school was that, like you like this secular band? Well, if you like this secular band, then this Christian band you're going to love. Yeah. Because they sound exactly the same. And so the argument is that like, basically secular music and Christian music was just as good. But you just needed to kind of find like a secular artist.
KJ52 was the Eminem of.
Right, yeah. But yeah, so they had the equivalents. So so what I would so let's say that I liked like Metallica, you know what I'm saying? So I would go and I would check out like the Christian version of Metallica. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, like it was just like completely terrible. I mean,
or sounded nothing like the original band.
Right.
Like,
not that there weren't talented people out there, because there definitely was. But so I'd say that the problem with the music, or the weird thing about the music is that one, I think they were trying to push like people away from secular music, because I mean we had sessions where they would talk about how damaging secular music could be to you, and like if you listen to such and such band, you could be like possessed or whatever. Right. So
it's like the backing tracks if you spin the record backwards.
Yeah, I remember the first time I read the lyrics to like, I mean I'll stick on Metallica because so I'd been taught that like Metallica was evil, bad. And so I read the lyrics and I was like, there's really nothing wrong. There's really nothing wrong with these lyrics. And then what's really funny is like if you read the lyrics to Metallica's music and compare them to some of the music that's out today, it's just like, holy crap.
It's Metallica's wholesome.
Well, they would probably consider Metallica like borderline Christian, you know what I'm saying? But, so I thought the music was pretty weird. And then also like a lot of the worship music, and I think this, somewhat like still kind of exists today, but it seems to be kind of geared more towards like a middle-aged woman than it is like for a man. It's just like
and we've talked about that before too, right? Like, because I think you sent me a podcast one time where there was some guy there was a guy that did research on this and proved that those were the demographics for modern worship music, right?
Yes, yeah. So if we don't have to talk like get stuck on like the Christian music industry, but like basically fun. Like I've like I did some reading and heard some podcasts on the Christian. Like, so it's an industry. And like the purpose of any industry is to make a profit or generate a profit. And so that the way that they would approach the industry was to pick a target market, and their target market was middle-aged women. And so it's not so much that it's good or bad. It's just that, and this was the point of the podcast I think I sent, is that it's not so much that Christian music is bad. It's just, it's not for me. Right. Yeah. So, and I think that the reason the realization that I came with that was just like, it's okay if I don't like this song about God's house and all the rooms. You know what I'm saying? Because it wasn't made for me. Right.
I was thinking of that same song.
So I mean, I think that was pretty weird. And then another thing is like, Josh mentioned it pretty briefly earlier, but the concept of turn or burn. Yeah. So I think the approach to evangelism was to make people fear hell. Yeah. And so a lot of the evangelists there was an evangelist that would go around the churches that were around us, and one of the things that he would do he would preach on what's it called, the rapture.
Yeah.
So he would preach on the rapture, and so that the idea was that basically God was going to come back. And so as a kid, like I believed that like the rapture was imminent. It's coming. Yeah. And so this one particular evangelist, one of the things that he would do is that he would read the passage in Revelations where like, the trumpet's going to sound or whatever. Right. And then he would have a guy go behind the church and he would blow a trumpet. Nice. And like, people would just like flock to the altar, so like, we got to get this in. And so it was just a different approach to evangelism. And like, it's really funny because you kind of see like really small hints of that the other day. Like, so for my son, he works in the deli in a grocery store. And this older gentleman came up to him and he was asking him like, hey, if you died right now, do you know where you'd go? And like, Titus was like,
the floor.
Right, yeah. And so basically the whole point of the conversation is like this guy was saying how, if you don't know where you're going to go when you're going to die, like you got to work on it. And I explained to Titus that like this guy was trying to be like, he's trying to help you, like, but it kind of reminded me of like, the focus back then was very much on, knowing where you're going to go if you died. Like it wasn't so much, how you live your life.
Right.
It was more like, you got to get, basically like, it's like, you got to get that insurance policy.
Yeah.
And so, it's almost kind of a fear-based, evangelism, which, worked. But at the same time, I think it kind of misses the point. I mean, you kind of miss out, on the whole, creating a heaven on earth, or, reducing the suffering of people, here on earth while you're still here. It very much a focus of, what happens when you die. So,
well, I think that goes back to the rules thing too, right? Like if the entire idea is that our faith is about us as individuals dying and going to heaven in the end, then we have to make sure that we live a life that will allow us to get there. So again, it's like you said, it's not about like cultivating virtue or doing good for the sake of honoring God or building the kingdom. It's about doing that as a form of fire insurance, like you said.
Correct.
Like I'm not going to do these things because if I do them, I could go to hell.
Right.
And the entire purpose and goal of my life is to go to heaven, which is not biblical.
It's just it's missing the point.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys ever read the Left Behind series?
No, I think I watched the movies. I mean, I think I might have started the first book and then, it lost me quick.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We don't have to turn this into a theological, it's a podcast.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know.
I really just want to talk about that culturally first, because I think for me that was again like the Lutheran Church, and we were ELCA, so they were a little bit more mainline, and then like the Lutheran Church moved out of that particular wing of the Lutheran world. But like I remember that when my mom, like it was in the late '90s, so my grandfather died, my mom's dad died in like '98 or whatever, and that was kind of a big spiritual turning point for her, which is why she wanted to seek out a church that we could like build a home, because my parents were kind of like nominal before then, and I remember that like when we started going to the Lutheran Church, like my mom was just trying to make Christianity relevant for us too, like trying to get me and my brother to buy into this. And I remember that I was like 13 years old. I never read the Bible. My mom got me the Left Behind for Kids series. And I think that one of the reasons why I struggled so much to read the Bible when I was in high school is that those books had a very profound impact on me in terms of like shaping the way that I thought about my faith, even though I wasn't really a part of a theological tradition that made that a part of their eschatology. So like, I read, and the Left Behind series is very much rooted in what you guys were talking about. It's like, we're going to follow the rules to make sure we make it in the end. And I remember like all throughout high school reading the New Testament over and over again and being like, well, this doesn't seem to be like what I was taught by the Left Behind series, but I don't really know how to think about it in any other way. And I think that leads to I think that there are a lot of people that struggle with that tension. There's kind of all these cultural pressures that are forcing you to think about your faith in one way. It's very different than the way that our faith is actually portrayed in the Bible.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that bothered me growing up in the church. I mean, so we'd mentioned like, we had the Nazarene manual, and the thing that even as a kid, because, I would read the Bible even as a kid. And my question to my dad, this Nazarene minister, that I had all the time is that, why do we put things in the manual that go beyond what the Bible says?
Yeah.
So like the Bible says that if there's a line or it's, it's like, this is the line, but the manual takes it, 3 steps forward. And then, I forget what his answer was, but like, but there was a pastor. Andy Stanley is a well-known pastor down in Georgia, and so he did a sermon series called Guardrails, and so the whole premise of the sermon series is that the Bible says to stop here, so we're gonna put up this guardrail so that you're not falling off the cliff. I mean, like, so you'll hit the guardrail before whatever. So I mean, I thought that was a pretty good explanation, but at the same time, I mean, I guess this kind of goes, I guess, to like personal opinion. I guess, I still don't really, I think the Bible's probably good enough. Right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Right. And so I think there's other things you can kind of do to make sure you don't slip and fall off a cliff. But, again, personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big thing for me as a kid, was like listening to the adults, just like taking it for granted of what they said was right, because they were, they were an adult. They knew better than me. They've been through more than I had. And that's what ended up burning me so much, I guess, as an adult. It was realizing, oh, wait, they didn't know what they were talking about. They were pushing something that somebody else told them. They didn't really study into it. They didn't really dig into it. And it was just all, okay, so-and-so said this, and they've always been a real good preacher, so this is what we do now, and this is just what you do. And I remember even like regurgitating phrases in church and be like, I'm saved and sanctified. And not even knowing what sanctified meant, because that was just when people got blessed. They said these things, and I was like,
this is what we're supposed to say.
Yeah. Everybody will be happy if I say this, and I'll be accepted. It was, I don't know.
Yeah, I think good intentions, though. I think that, one thing I'll say is that, even though a lot of this stuff, I think the whole point maybe, or, one of the sub points of this podcast is like, some of this stuff is like done damage. Yeah. I think that all these things, they were created with good intentions. The problem is that whenever you're kind of missing the overarching goal of the mission of the church, if the goal gets cloudy for someone who's not in the church, then it makes it a barrier to them joining the church. Or, I think to take it like a step further, I think it also could put somebody in a position to where they're already in the church, they're already like kind of wrestling with having a relationship with Christ, but then like they get so focused on like, well, all I got to do is follow these rules, and like follow these rules and tithe, and I'm like, I'm good to go,
right?
And it's kind of you fall into the same trap as like some other denominations where it's like, well, it kind of becomes a checklist, so you're not really acting, you're not living like this spirit filled life. You're just checking boxes, and as long as you check these boxes and put the people who aren't checking boxes, or kind of shame them a little bit, then you're doing everything you need to do.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, and I do think that a lot of this is more of a reflection of particular strands of American culture than it is anything that has to do with the Bible. And I always kind of go back to the 1980s. This is really interesting that like before the 1980s, the evangelical church in the United States, there were a lot of very traditional like ways of living and thinking, but they were more or less politically homeless. Like the evangelicals didn't align with one party or the other. And it wasn't really until Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1980 where they were like, look, there's this giant block of potential voters out there, and if we can convince them to vote Republican, then we can win this election. And that's exactly what they did. Like they deliberately politically appealed to evangelicals, and he won in a landslide in both 80 and in 84. And I think that was the moment that the American evangelical movement sided with the Republican Party. And I think from that point on, and I think the 90s and the 2000s are a reflection of this, from that point on, there was kind of this combination of, well, it's like what should have been spiritual was politicized, and what should have remained political was spiritualized. And so a lot of the rules, a lot of the checklists, a lot of this had to do with the maintenance of political power by the Republican Party, and not actually being obedient to God and following, like the teachings of Jesus. And so I think that really soured the church for a lot of people as well. And just kind of like looking back on my experience growing up, I can kind of see very obviously now how a lot of what I was told to believe was extremely politically motivated and had nothing to do like with actually developing me as a Christian. I wonder if you guys experienced kind of that too, or if you thought about it that way. Because I know that like in my church, and I remember the pastor of my Lutheran church, very much a Republican, and he wouldn't get on stage and say you had to vote for the Republicans, but you could tell, especially like in the late 2000s when like all the gay marriage stuff was coming up, when that was becoming a live issue, like he was very, very vocal in his opposition to a lot of that, which I don't think pastors should do. And I think that we have to have a lot of nuance when we approach those political topics, but it was very clear where his perspective was. And he made that equation between like, if you are an American Christian, then you have to support Republican policies. And I don't know if you guys have noticed any of that growing up, but that was very obvious to me, like being in school and kind of seeing all this stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I noticed it when I was a kid because, it was probably a little bit over my head. But, I would say that was probably wrapped into the DNA of what I thought it meant to be a Christian was there was probably a mixture between, this like these teachings from the Bible and like, and something that I know that you've talked a lot about on your podcast, was just Christian nationalism. Yeah. So, there was it did kind of feel that there was kind of a like if you were a Christian, then you were also this political stance. I don't think that I would register. I wouldn't have registered it back then as like it means that you were a Republican,
right?
But I did kind of feel like it was okay to fight against these people. because like, you know, it's a saying that's kind of come back. And, you know, I'm not saying like, you know, for good or bad, but, you know, I really felt like whenever you were a Christian in the 90s, you were a Christian, but also you were kind of like had this a little bit of like this America first.
Yes.
And so like, it's okay if like, it's okay to be a Christian in America and to be like, yeah, America is awesome. All these other countries, like they suck. And like, you know, if we need to go to war and kill these people, it's fine.
Yeah, God bless America, baby.
Because America's first.
It's those Muslims over there. The Muslims are causing all the problems.
Yeah, or, you know, or the brown people, like they're brown, you know?
Right.
So like, you know, I think that back then, there was a lot of mixture, and I think you still see that, today, and not as much, but you do kind of see this allegiance between, like, if you're a really strong Christian, you also are very closely tied to like American politics and like things going well for the nation of America. And like, you know, that's always kind of bothered me to a certain extent. Not that, you know, obviously, you know, I love America. I love that, you know, I've had the opportunities that I have, but I also have always been somewhat cognizant of the fact that like my brother in Christ could be Chinese.
Right.
Or, you know, my brother in Christ could be from Iran. And so, you know, whenever we do any kind of like military action in a different country, you know, I think that if you're a Christian, you kind of have to ask yourself of like, are my brothers and sisters in Christ going to be negatively affected by this military action? And if so, how should that inform my support or, you know, lack of support for this, you know, this action? And so anyway, I mean, that could take the podcast, I think, down a pretty like a far trip. But anyway, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. But being back in East Kentucky, they did not care to get up on stage and be like, listen here, like you better vote for Republican. And that was a very easy thing for them to do because they knew everybody was on the same page. There was no worry about it because you were related to everyone, you knew everyone. And so they just, they would get up and straight up do that. And in my naivety, I guess is the right term, I remember when I was first able to vote, my mom was like, you need to go vote. And I was like, that's true. My grandpa was in World War II. It's our civic duty. You gotta do this. I don't even know who to vote for. Mom says, just go vote straight Republican. It'll be fine. And I said, well, okay. And I just went and did it. Like I look back on that and I'm so ashamed. I just went and did that. And I started looking at it. I was like, wait, that's when I first started questioning things. I was like, wait a second. Why am I just doing that? Like I've always just done what you said. And like, why am I just doing this? Why am I just doing that? Why am I just going to these places? And because of that, I've even joked with Matt a few times before of like wanting to go to like a Jehovah's Witness church just because I always heard it was this way. And I was like, what's it really like in there? Like, I don't want to go get converted, or I'm not going to get converted, but it's like, maybe I should go check this church out. Maybe I should not to just to get more knowledge.
You want to know where
it.
they're coming from.
Yeah, because growing up, it was like, dude, you never talk to them. And my grandpa even had a story of Jehovah's Witnesses showing up as he was gardening. He was out in his garden hoeing some dirt, and they were like, hey, brother, we'd like to talk to you about, you know, our Lord and Savior, or whatever it is they say. I don't think they say Lord and Savior. And he said, well, boys, let's just wait a second, and let's get down on our knees and pray before we start talking. And he said that, and when he prayed back home, like, it was crazy. Like, you heard him all up the holler. Like, like literally.
It's a prayer.
Like,
oh, yeah. Like, so he got down. He's like, dear God, I want you to get on top of these fellas and show them the way of their wrongs. And when he woke up, he bragged about how they were running out of the holler. And I was like, that's not. What? No, that's not.
I'm picturing Saruman from like Lord of the Rings. Like, he's like,
right. He's got the staff. Yeah.
So that was kind of what I grew up in. Of like, my grandpa was the best, and so he told that story, and we always laughed. And I look back on it, and I'm like, but why did I laugh at that? That's you're scaring people away because of your love for Christ. Like, that's not
right.
Yeah.
When we should be trying to build common ground with people.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's like the Acts 17 thing. When Paul's in Athens, like he appeals to them. They say, all right, you guys worship this God that's unknown. Let me tell you about who he is. You know, we instead of like trying to push these people out, we should be trying to bring them in. That should be the goal. But again, I think that goes back to like the point you guys have been making all along, that in that period of American Christianity, it was really all about the maintenance of boundaries. That was what it all came down to. So all the rules, all the regulations, the way that you spoke, the way that you dressed. It was about creating a dividing line between insiders and outsiders. Now, whether that dividing line was biblical or not was irrelevant. That was what it was.
Yeah.
So for you guys personally, what would you say some of the most frustrating experiences for you during that time of your life were? Because I mean, both of you guys have moved on from that in the same way that I think, a lot of us that were raised in that environment have. What were some of the experiences that you had where you were just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do my faith like this anymore.
I mean, there's a lot of different things to hit on, I guess. And like some of the things I've already shared as far as like with my grandfather, and just kind of, and going to vote even like that, all those things just kind of, I started becoming an adult and realizing, oh, I can make my own choices. Oh, I can start looking into these things as opposed to just taking for granted what I'm told to do. Right. And for me, it might be totally different for a lot of people, but it might be a lot of the same for some, of just trying to do what you're told is right and realizing that that's not how things need to work. You can study for yourself. You can go out and experience life. And I've traveled. I've been, we've been to England. We've been to Paris. I've been to Africa. I've been to all these crazy places, which was crazy being from such a small little town where most people never leave that county seat, you know?
Yeah.
And I never really wanted to do those things and ended up becoming a well-traveled person in a way and seeing other cultures and seeing all this stuff around the world and just realizing there's so much more to life than just our little speck that we're sitting in, just this little speck in Independence, Kentucky, or just our little church and the little things we do. Like there's so much more out there that's a broader aspect. But like Matt said earlier, I kind of forgot what the question was.
Just like when did you realize, or what were some of the experiences that led you to realize you didn't want to do church like the way that you were brought up?
Yeah.
So I guess I would say is that, the question, like as you're getting older. And so you're kind of, when you're a child, like I don't know that you question as much, like what you're being told. You're like, this is the way it is. And so you're kind of in like this whole learning phase. And then as you mature and you start to generate your own ideas, you start to read your own books, you start to kind of get to, whenever you're a child, your perspectives are limited because your perspective is the one that you have in the house and, whatever, kind of things that you see outside the house. As you get older, you kind of encounter other perspectives. And it's not so much that, I think that's why you see a lot of, young people when they go off to college, they just like go this, people use the term, they go crazy. It's because like it's the first time they've been exposed to all these different perspectives. What's that?
Rumspringa.
Is it the
Amish?
Yeah. Oh, is that
passage? Yeah.
But I think that, one of the things that I kind of was realizing early on was that, whenever somebody, so we kind of talked about how like, Christianity was kind of rules based. And I think that the thing that really kind of turned me off about that was the way that the church would respond to somebody who wouldn't follow the rules. So you mentioned earlier about in-group and out-group. And so something that's very common within the Amish community is that, if somebody does something that's, not like against the rules, then they have a term like, we're going to shun them or whatever. So, I mean, even though I would say that I guess my experience has been from the Protestant church. So even though we're not Amish, I mean, I think that we practice many of the same techniques, only we just we don't really call it out. We don't call it shunning.
Right.
But like, I mean, we basically, we kind of like, we kind of, in a almost like I would say manipulative way, we kind of let somebody know that what they're doing isn't right without just going and kind of saying, like telling that person like, hey, like I don't really necessarily agree with what you're doing. Like, do you want to talk about it? It's very much more of a kind of like a, Josh mentioned earlier that like, we have like a rule for all these different things. Unless it gets really serious, and then we just don't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, whenever I kind of would realize that we kind of highlighted certain sins and say, okay, well, these sins we're going to focus on. And then these sins we're just going to pretend maybe aren't even really there.
Right.
And then like, if you practice these sins, then like, we're not going to, kind of approach you in a loving manner and like have a conversation about it. We're just going to shun you. And, or we're basically going to like, kind of ostracize you or hurt your social capital basically in the church. And so I think that's probably whenever I was, originally kind of thinking like, something's screwy here. I don't know that I ever was, I don't think I've ever been, completely anti-Christian.
Right.
I think that the way that I would describe it is that, there are times throughout my life to where I was like, I know that, I'm a Christian, but at the same time, I'm just not really sure what the church is doing. So it's like, you're not really sure, so, I mean, you have to make a conscious decision, why do I go to church on Sunday mornings?
Right.
And if you don't, if you don't have an answer other than because I'm supposed to, eventually you're just not going to go anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably when I started asking questions like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important to have that mindset too. And I do think that there was a sense in which I say they, but I think there's a sense in which that culture did not promote the asking of those kind of questions for exactly that reason, right? They're worried that once you start pulling on the threads that the whole thing would unravel. Yeah. And so there was a sense in if you ask questions, then you don't really have faith. And if you ask the wrong questions, then you might wind up losing it altogether, which I think ironically, and this is something I want to talk to you guys about too, and this is something that I really have been exploring over the last couple of years, especially on social media. I engage with a lot of these the ex-evangelical or former evangelicals, the progressive Christian types that had left evangelical Christianity and either abandoned it completely or became progressives. And I just think that phenomenon is so interesting because I think a lot of it has to do with what we've been discussing. There were these kids that were raised in these really constricted home environments where it was all about living up to a certain set of ethical standards that may or may not have been biblical. And when they got out and realized, like you were saying, Matt, that there is this whole world out there, then they were like, well, I don't have to live like my parents told me that I have to live. And so they either wind up abandoning the faith altogether or rejecting it for just a progressive version of their kind of upbringing. So I just think that phenomenon is so interesting. How much of, and I think, and again, this goes back to the politicization thing too. I think since 2016, the media's done a really good job of convincing people that you're not a good person if you vote for Republicans. And I think that there were a lot of Christians that were raised in homes where they were good people vote for the right candidates. And so now it's well, we can't vote for right wingers anymore because the media tells us that that's bad. So we have to vote for the left wingers now. It's a very interesting dynamic. But I think this kind of there was an element of toxicity in that church culture that pushed a lot of people out. And I was just wondering, based on your experience, have you guys seen the same thing? Because I know personally a lot, and I made this analogy before or this comparison on the show before, but I think back to my time in youth group in high school, and there were 25 kids in my youth group in high school, and I'm still friends with a lot of them now, but there are only two of us, me and my buddy Anthony, that still go to church. Out of the 25 kids that were in youth group, only two of us are actually still involved. And I think a lot of it has to do with those factors that we've been discussing.
Yeah. Well, I think that not to steal the mic again.
No.
Well, I was going to say that it's kind of so. One of the things that I was kind of highlighting about the church in the 90s and the 2000s was that the focus was a little off. And I would say that whenever you get too focused on the do's and the don'ts, then you can live in that space for a long time. You'll meet people. I mean, you'll meet people who live in that space for their entire lives. And so I think that whenever you get to a certain point, let's say you're a child that grows up in that environment, and then you do kind of start becoming the adult, you start seeing the external world. I think there's two different ways that you go. I think there's some people who will just hold on super tight to their upbringing because to them that's what makes up the reality. And then there is the other people who they say, okay, well, it isn't. They realize it's not exactly the way that my parents said that it is, and so they just abandon the entire thing. They're saying, well, if this isn't true, then none of it could be true. And I think that that's the danger of focusing too much on the do's and the don'ts. Whenever you read, the New Testament specifically, and I mean, you could make an argument that you can see this throughout the Old Testament as well. Is that while there is a focus on, I think that you're observing people's behaviors, and you're kind of, the question is do those behaviors exhibit someone who has the Holy Spirit? So it's not so much that you shouldn't do this. It's well, no, if you have a relationship with Christ in a way that you have the Holy Spirit, then your life is going to look to where maybe you're not participating in those actions because you have a Spirit-filled life, not because it's it's a to-do list. So I think that the problem is that if you take the focus off of developing relationships with Christ to where people are, encountering the Holy Spirit, then you don't really have to run into too much of the do's and the don'ts, because you should be naturally seeing fruits of the Spirit. Where if you focus too much on you don't do this and you don't do that. Like I have a saying that like typically whenever we get in these discussions like this, is that, somebody will say, I'm going to pray that Timmy stops watching porn.
Right.
And I said, well, maybe you should pray that Timmy gets, encounters the Holy Spirit, because then the Holy Spirit will tell Timmy to stop watching porn.
Yeah.
And so now, granted, it's not like you can't bring it up. I mean, maybe you should have that conversation with Timmy. But again, the focus shouldn't be on shaming someone for what they're doing. The focus should be on developing a relationship with Christ, so that you don't have to worry about what he's doing.
Yeah, well, and to your point as well, and this is something that I think a lot of Christians don't realize, or just never fully grasp, is that like the goal of kind of the Christian moral life, or like at the center of how we should relate to other people, is it's all about edification. This is a term that Paul uses all the time, that like our responsibility towards other people is to help build them up. Mm-hmm. And so in an environment where it's all about the rules, it's not like we're not trying to help build people up. We're telling them, you can't do this, don't do it. And so again, going back to the issue of porn or whatever, if you know someone that's dealing with something like that, the prayer really should be, well, help them. The prayer shouldn't be just help them to stop. The prayer should be like, what can I do to help build them up and make their life, like, how can I invest in them? And I think that would make a huge difference. It's just a totally different way of looking at that kind of relationship than the don't do this, don't do that. Thank you so much. I texted my wife a couple of minutes ago to bring me coffee, and she did. Thank you so much, Bethany. You're great. You're great.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. So what about you, Josh? Have you noticed that dynamic too?
What was coming up to my mind was, and it was kind of going down the trail that Matt was going down a little bit, but one of the things I'm starting to or have for a long time is people back home really like to blame the devil or even give credit to God too much.
Yeah.
I feel like...
yeah. You burn your toast. The devil did it. Yeah. Exactly. Satan's at work in my kitchen.
The devil and Biden, right?
Yeah, the devil and Biden. It's Joe Biden.
And so that's all that kept resounding in my head, is thinking about those times that I'm just like, you can't just blame the devil for everything. You can't give credit to God for everything too. I mean, yes, God is creator. Awesome. I don't want to sound sacrilegious, but no, you can't just give credit to everything. Every time something good happens, you'll be like, oh, God did this for me. God did that for me. I'm in such a limbo there of like not knowing how to approach people that way, and to not say, stop being dumb or whatever, or just, take responsibility for yourself sometimes. We are the free moral agents. I think most everybody can agree on that when it comes to evangelical movement and stuff like that. I say that a lot, stuff like that. I catch myself. But yeah, that's all that kept going through my head, is like, I want so many people to step away from that concept of like just putting blame or sharing credit, when really there's such a bigger concept of us taking responsibility for things. And I'm very black and white a lot of times in my head. I don't always show it physically, but I am very black and white in my head of like, if you do this, you're wrong. If you do that, you're right, in a sense. And as far as like punishment goes and things like that, I always had a big hang up of, when it's a Christian, they never get the full brunt of the punishment, in a sense. There would be so many times of like, well, yeah, they sold crack, but they found Jesus, so they shouldn't have to go to jail. And I'm like, no, just because they found Jesus doesn't mean you don't have to pay for your crimes. And I feel like there's so much of that I get hung up on anymore, of I don't know.
Like, people have agency and responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where my brain just kept running to, as we're sitting here listening to each other. So
yeah, that's one of the weird dynamics, dude. That's kind of a side note. But one of the really strange things about Wesleyans, or that people come out of that tradition, is that Wesleyans don't believe in predestination. Like, we're not Calvinists, we're not Reformed. Mm-hmm. And so we do believe in free will. We do believe that people have moral agency, but so many people that I know in the Wesleyan tradition act exactly like Calvinists when it comes to morality and like the future. Like, God's got a plan for my life, and all I have to do is trust him, and I'm going to follow this track all the way down to the end, which is not actually what like we're supposed to believe. I don't know, and which I know that's kind of a side note, but that is an interesting dynamic. But then I wonder how, again, I think I wonder how much of this goes back to the fact that like American evangelical culture is heavily shaped by like the Presbyterian and Baptist traditions. Like, so I think that even people that are on like the people that are within that cultural framework are influenced by theologies that aren't actually inherent in the tradition they participate in. It's just a really weird dynamic for me. I don't know. Something that,
yeah, I think so. I mean, like, I almost wasn't going to bring this up because I can't think of any examples, but like, I'm a big, like slogans kind of guy. So like if you can come up with a slogan that kind of encapsulates like, an entire framework of things, then I think that's really helpful for me. Yeah. So, again, like I can't think of any, but I think that, the thing that I think that a lot of the, I don't know that it bleeds over so much from Protestant to Catholic, but I think in the Protestant church, there's a lot of like, thoughts that kind of permeate all throughout, so it doesn't really matter if you're Calvinist or Wesleyan or whatever. There's a few, like, it's almost like we all have the same flaws. Yeah. But I'd say that it goes the opposite way as well. It's like there also are probably, even though there's differences in theology, there are some things that we're all kind of getting right too, so I don't know. I mean, I think that ultimately, I think that one of the things that I was going to kind of hit on, or I guess what I'm coming to find as I get older, is that like churches are made up of people. And I think that anytime you lump people into a group, I think it's very easy, one, for a group of people to go off into like a very different direction. But like at the end of the day, they're just people. So like they're going to be flawed. It's like, churches are going to have flaws. People are going to have flaws. So one-on-one, I think you can always kind of find common ground. It's very difficult sometimes to find common ground with like a group of people. Yeah. I think you're going to find something to kind of pick at.
Yeah. I agree. What do you think?
No comment.
No, I thought that was really well said. Yeah. Well, we got a couple minutes left here, a few minutes left here, and I kind of want to talk about the direction of the church. So it's pretty obvious to me that we're not going back to like the late 90s, early 2000s way of doing church. And even as you guys were talking about the Nazarene church and how the Nazarene church has developed and changed over the last couple of years, like American Christian culture is in a state of flux. And in 30 or 40 years, I think it's going to look a lot different than it does now, in the same way that it looks a lot different now than it did 20 or 30 years ago. And while it's impossible to predict the future, I kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the direction that you think the church is headed. I do feel like we are in a really, really weird place right now where everything has been politicized. And so you have the American Christian right, which is kind of characterized by Christian nationalism, which is, for all of its malevolence, Christian nationalism isn't one thing. That is definitely a direction in which a lot of people on the right are moving. What's interesting about that, though, is that there are a lot of people that are a part of the so-called American Christian right who have moral standards that are dramatically more relaxed than Christians ever have in the past. Like, there are people that associate themselves with Christian nationalism that have like no problem with sex outside of marriage and things that have traditionally been associated with like right-wing Christianity. But then you also have progressive Christianity on the left, where there are these people that's kind of almost like the American, or it's almost like the mirror image of the American right wing, where they are like, they're Christians, but instead of being like right wing Christians, they just take all of these progressive Christian principles and try to read them into the Bible. And so I think the church is kind of stuck in limbo between those two groups right now. And then there are people like us that are kind of just, I don't know, not like, we're in the middle somewhere, and so for me, the thing that is the most concerning about me going forward would be the further political polarization of the church, that people are going to be forced into one of those two camps, and that will ultimately undermine like the witness that the church is supposed to have for the gospels. I think the upshot of that is that Christianity is kind of dying out in the West, and I think that in 30 or 40 years, the real global hub of Christianity will probably be in Africa and Asia. I think that's going to, in South America, I think that they're going to be the ones that really that are really leading the future for Christianity. But where do you guys, but maybe I could be wrong. Like I could, maybe I'm just negative, and maybe I'm just in kind of like this, this is part of my job with Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm in this echo chamber where we always talk about the political ramifications of our faith, and maybe normal people don't think about it like that. I don't know. But I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. Based on where we've come, where do you guys think the church is headed? Like over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, what do you think the church is going to look like?
And this is coming from that whole black and white kind of thought process. There's a big part of me that wants us to buckle back down on some of those old rules that used to bug me so much, just because it gave me sustenance to hang on to back in the day. And so my nostalgia of like, well, maybe if we had a few rules, maybe that wouldn't be so bad, because I worry about us just going so far down the path that then we lose the path altogether. Then it's just a big giant field, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, what were we doing again? Kind of along the lines of what you were saying. But, and like I said, that's just my nostalgia of my childhood in a way, of it's still hanging on in there, of like, maybe if we had some rules, we would stay in a certain path. Because what is it? So many people are talking about, these big mega churches are all like, yeah, let's be a circle, not a row. Let's not separate ourselves. Let's be inclusive this way. And it's like kind of scary of like, wait, like, how inclusive are you going? Like, are you just allowing everybody to do anything and not be like, well, the Bible is the Bible. Like, we still got to look at some of the things in it and not just be so inclusive. And I guess that's the border of like, how inclusive can you be, or like what route are you going to go with the inclusivity? And then I got myself sidetracked again.
Well, you're right. I mean, there has to be boundaries. You can't, because look, and it doesn't matter. Like, there's a difference between someone who plays for the Cincinnati Bengals and me. There are boundaries, and everyone who's like a football fan or a sports fan, like, we all know that in order for a group to exist, there has to be boundaries. And thank goodness, because if I played football, then like they would lose even more than they're already losing, right? So everyone knows that like groups have to have boundaries. It's just, I think, like you said, it's a matter of like, how do we reassess which boundaries are worth maintaining and which ones were artificial and shouldn't have been put up in the first place
before they all go away. And I say all that to say that I'm not afraid. I know that was so many people during the political season here, but right before the election, they were like, this could change everything. What do you do? I think a Jehovah's Witness showed up at the house, and they're like, there's a lot of stuff going on in the news. Like, how do you feel? Are you worried? And I said, nah, everything's going to work out. Like, no matter who gets in office, no matter what happens this way or that way, we're going to be fine. Like, everything's going to work its way out. Yeah, there's going to be a war. Yeah, there's going to be a this or that. I think things are just going to keep moving along because everybody's waiting for the end of time. And I'm like, how about we just hang out in the time we have and not be worried about the end of time? So I don't know. That's my carefree spirit view of it, I guess.
That's very optimistic. I like that. All right, what about you, Matt? Are you going to hit us with the negativity here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I don't have any forecasting, so I don't know where the direction of the American church is going. I guess so I have the same fears as you mentioned, Alex, that, there could be a potentially polarizing effect that's going on, meaning that because it's happening politically, meaning that it seems like the left is moving farther away from the right and vice versa, even though I would say that, during this past election, you can almost say that that's kind of like went down a little bit. But, what I'd say is that, this is an issue that I still, would say I'm somewhat passionate about with church, is that my hope is that a lot of the denominations are out there, that there'd be a unifying effect and not so much of a, this is what we do, this is what you do. Because I think that focus, so there's like thousands of different denominations. We already talked about that. There's factors of the Catholic Church, there's the Protestant Church, there's big church mindset, there's small church mindset. I think that the focus on the rules, I think it would be completely missing the point, only because I think that whenever it's almost like you're reverting back to what the original error was, is that you're focusing on the rules. Where I mean, I think that, you asked the question of like, where do we draw the line? I mean, I feel like that the Bible is fairly clear and as far as, what does a Christian look like? Yeah. So, I mean, like there's sections of the Bible that say this is what the fruits of the Spirit are, meaning that if somebody has the Spirit of Christ within them, these are the traits that they exhibit, and this is what they would look like. And then conversely, it says if somebody is missing or, is not living, a spirit-filled life, this is what that person looks like. So I don't necessarily need that. I don't feel like we need to adjust, but at the same time, I guess what I would say is that, there was a time when I was trying to figure out what the ideal church would be. And so when you do that, you kind of you compare denominations. So you would say, well, I like the way that this denomination approaches this. And then I like the way that this denomination approaches that. And so you're kind of comparing them like you're comparing fruit in a supermarket. Yeah. But in reality, I don't know that, one denomination is right and this other denomination is wrong. Mm-hmm. I think it really kind of comes into this is a good fit for this individual and this church is a good fit for this individual. Yeah. This church is accomplishing this in this space and this church is accomplishing that in that space. And so I think that, I would say the main thing that needs to happen in the American church is that there needs to be more of a unifying. So basically, so one of the things that I've always been very frustrated about is that, like, if you're a Christian, but you go to a different church, and like it's almost like you don't consider that other person like a Christian, which is exactly how I felt when I was a kid. So like if I was a kid, like, we were taught that, like, I don't know that they explicitly said that Catholics weren't Christians, but that's
there's some churches that do, for sure.
I mean, that is definitely the feeling I got. You know, that if you were a Catholic, that you weren't really a Christian. Where now that I've become an adult, and I've attended Catholic church, I've gone to different denominations. Kind of what I've come to realize is that churches are just made up of individual people, and that the doctrine of, like, we're gonna make our stand right here, we're gonna make our stand right here. It's not really as important as, like, pursuing a spirit-filled life, and then also loving the other people that are, I mean, at this point, especially with the decrease in, like, church attendance, like, it really needs to be a diminishing of any kind of negative talk about fellow Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, we really need to unify and, like, come together under, like, a single flag. Whereas right now, I think that the more divided that we are, the less impact that we're going to have, and also the less of an impact that we are going to have on culture. And so I guess that's what I would say is that it's not so much for, like, there needs to be, like, a shifting of rules one way or another. I think that churches need to realize the positive aspects of other churches, and also they need to do a little bit more cooperative work. So, I guess that's my rant.
Yeah. Oh, no. I absolutely love that. And I agree with that as well. I guess to wrap up today, we've all been burned by church in some ways or the others. And there are so many people, especially on the left, that overstate the negative experiences they have in church. Like, people talk about their church experiences as PTSD and trauma. Mm. And I'm sure that there are some people out there that people that were, like, sexually assaulted, or like, like, there's real trauma for some people. But I know for a lot of people that have left the church that I interact with, they say trauma when they mean I had a bad experience, and I don't agree with what I was raised. And I think that's overstating it. But there are people that have, like, been like us, like, burned by church, and that have questions, and that maybe don't have anyone to help them work through some of the questions that they have. So for those kinds of people that have been burned by church and that don't really know where to go, like, what kind of advice would you give to those people? It's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Yeah. So it's like, what advice we would give to someone who's been burned by the church?
Yeah. So, like, if someone comes to you like, man, I'm a Christian, but I had a really bad experience in church, and I don't know if I want to go back. I don't know if it's important. Like, I don't know if I should make my spiritual life my priority. Like, people that are in that position.
I guess my response would be that it's not about the church. So, yep. And I would say that is also probably something that we kind of get wrong, I think, in the church, is that we push the church, but whenever we should be pushing, like, a personal relationship with Christ. And so I think the church is important. It's, because it's kind of where you go, and you kind of, you get to have a relationship with other people who believe like you and can build you up, and, like, you can be strengthened by that. But also, like, church isn't the point. Like, the point is to, like, develop, this spirit-filled life that you can then take out into the world. And then, like, so you're going to have more peace in your own life. And then also you're going to reduce the suffering of those stuff around you. So, I mean, I do get it. It's not like I've never had a bad experience in church, but at the same time, like, the focus isn't, like, the church. And so if you go into a church and you're wanting that church experience to be perfect, then you're going to be let down, because churches are made up of imperfect people. So, what I would say is that I think that, to that person, I would mostly encourage them, one, that they need community, because I think that if, you've heard the saying that, birds of a feather. So if your community is in a bar, that might be fine, but, how are those people speaking into your life? So whereas, like, if you go to a church, the church is going to have their problems, but chances are there's going to be a community of people there who are going to love and care for you and wish the best for you. So I guess what I would say is that, one, don't put too many expectations on the church. It's not going to church in itself is not going to fulfill, all your wildest dreams.
Right.
But it could help you do the other thing, which is to basically have a personal relationship with Jesus, and then to, basically have an impact, a positive impact, in your world. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of the same thoughts in that concept. It's not, it's not about the building, but it is a building that gathers people together that are trying to be Jesus to people out in the world. And then, not to sound preachy like an old school preacher, like be Jesus to everybody, you know, that was one of my proud achievements in life, was that when I worked in youth work and stuff like that, there were so many people that either went to a Bible college and stuff, and they would have to ask me, and they'd be like, hey, can I use you in a sermon? I'd be like, why? And they're like, because you were Jesus to me. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then I would get to hear all these stories of people being like, just your love and your passion for people. Because that was a big thing growing up, I guess, was my thing, is I couldn't stand the separation. That's how Matt and I ever met, because we're from two different worlds. You were a city kid that listened to crazy Christian music that it was evil from where I was from. but because I had that passion in my heart to like reach out to other people, not to save them, but just to reach out to people, we gained this awesome friendship, and, you know, and just so out of nature of what, outside of the nature of what would truly happen normally. But if somebody came to me that had backslidden that way, I would, or not backslidden,
No, yeah, bring it back.
excommunicated. But yeah, I would just do that same thing. It's just like, listen, if you want to hang out with me, you know, I want you to feel welcome enough to talk to me. If you want to hang out with me and try to help better your life a little bit, I feel like us hanging out in this place is going to give us some positive impact in our life. It's going to help us to be able to maybe do that. Like you said, it's not going to have everything together. There's going to be things we don't like about this place, but there's some things we do like about this place. We're going to do this, giving food out to people. We're going to do this. We're going to give items to people that need hygiene items. There's going to be good things that come out of what's happening here. Nothing's ever going to be 100%. If you're wanting to better your life, let's try to do this together.
Yeah, I love it. Well, guys, there are going to be several hundred people that listen to this episode, and you have the mics right now. Is there anything that you would like to say about any topic before we wrap it up today? Completely open to both of you.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
So this is something that I've been running around with Pod Bless at our other podcast. Go check it out. But
links in the show notes.
Yeah. You guys are very intelligent, and you guys are very deep thoughted. That's the wrong term. Deep minded. Let's say, would you ever have thought of this or studied this? Did Adam have a belly button? That's my question to you.
I guess my first response is, was there an Adam?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't believe that Adam and Eve were historical figures.
Way to try to get me fired from some of my jobs.
Dang.
Matt, you're just asking the question, so I'll go ahead and be the heretic here. I do think that Genesis 1 through 11, the prologue of Genesis, is designed to be mythological in the sense that it's an origin story that explains why God needed to call Abraham and his family in the first place. And I think that it is a polemic that's based on other ancient Near Eastern creation myths that's designed to show both the goodness that's inherent in the world that God created and the fact that human beings, through their rebellion against God, screwed up his creative order. And that sets the stage for Genesis 12, which is the real opening to Genesis, where God calls Abraham to undo the sin of the world and be a blessing to the nation. So I don't believe that Adam and Eve are actual people that you go back in the time machine and meet. So I guess in that sense, Adam would not have a belly button because he did not exist as a historical figure.
I agree.
I could be wrong. I know. Okay. I could be wrong. I know. I have listeners that are very conservative and that would say, that Adam and Eve were historical figures, and you can prove that. You can demonstrate that historically. But I think that the narrative approach to the prologue of Genesis makes a lot more sense of the text as we have it.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that I would agree, but also I would just say that it's an opinion, and that because I wasn't there could have been. I don't know.
Right.
I think with the law of the Bible, I don't know that necessarily it's not like this. If this brick is wrong, then everything else, I think it's an opinion, but I guess I would say the same thing.
Yeah, I think he didn't have one either. So
I've done enough. I've criticized Ken Ham and the Creation Museum enough on the show that I think everyone pretty much knows where I'm coming from. But again, that just kind of goes back to put a bow on this. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just about the need to be a little more open-minded about all of these issues and understand, like, we don't have all the answers. The Bible's incredibly complicated. Human life is complicated. Relationships are complicated. None of this is easy. And I think that the search within certain quarters of evangelical Christianity for easy answers to these very complex questions is misguided. So, and people should, and like you were saying, Matt, people should have more humility to people that think about it differently than them. So, all that to say that if you strongly disagree with what I said, so go ahead and send me an email or DM me on Twitter, and we can
have civil discourse about it.
Yeah, we'll have very civil discourse.
It was funny. My mom's answer while we were doing our live show, I asked that question to be funny, and my mom quoted in and said, "Well, I think he had a belly button because he was made in the image of God," and I was like, I've never seen God's belly button, but okay.
Hey, well, guys, this has been a lot of fun this morning. Matt, I know you don't have a podcast, but do you want to promote anything before you leave? Is there any sponsorships that make you money? Anything that will help you financially? What do you got?
No. So like, I guess, I didn't really plan on anything. So I guess since I didn't plan on anything, I'll promote this. There's something out there called the Bible Project. So it's an organization. I think they're based in Oregon, but one of the things that they do is they do a really good job of interpreting the Bible, from a historical standpoint, and also from analyzing scripture and what it's actually telling us. And so I would say that has been a huge help for me, and I'm a huge fan. So I don't, obviously not associated with it anymore. I don't get any money if anybody goes. But I would check out the Bible. If you're interested in learning more about the Bible and what the Bible is actually trying to tell us, then I would check out the Bible Project.
Yeah, that's Tim Mackey. I need to get him on my show sometime. He'd be a cool
that
guy
would
to
be
talk
fantastic.
To. He'd be a cool guy to talk to. All right, Josh, you are a podcaster and got some stuff that you want to rep. So go ahead. What do you got?
Yeah, Pod Bless Podcast. There are several that have that name out there, but they're all of other languages. So if you find one that's English, it's probably us. But Pod Bless Podcast, it's a show we've been doing for 4 years. Go out there and check us out. We do a live every Thursday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. But we just have a good time. We laugh, we joke around. There's one pastor and a couple of us that work in church as volunteers. And every once in a while, we'll have just a regular person on who's not even a Christian that, we just hang out and have some fun segments, have some fun times, have some interaction with you as a guest or you as a follower or listener. So, yeah, just check us out and have fun with us.
It's great. And I'm sorry, my rabbit is aggressively drinking water in the background. So if you hear that noise, that's what that is. Well, Matt, Josh, thank you guys so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Alex, for having us.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.